sensible, simple, proven, and effective as a technology to help our law enforcement agencies. It is a crime-fighting tool to solve gun-related crimes, and it is time to make use of this technology. H.R. 5266 legislation, which I introduced, the National Crime Gun Identification Act, requires that new semi-automatic pistols manufactured or imported into the U.S. starting on January 1st, 2010, be equipped with microstamping technology in the breech face and firing pin of the pistol. A first violation by any manufacturer or importer of that firearm would incur a fine, or if there is a violation, that would incur a fine of $1,000 per weapon involved. If there's a second violation, the legislation would call for a $2,000 per weapon fine, and if there is a third violation, a $3,000 per weapon fine. We've heard it from people throughout the country. We saw the state legislature, with the help of the governor, pass legislation in California to institute microstamping technology here, and we're here to hear from some true leaders of this nation about what it would mean to have that type of gun stamping technology in their communities as well.
As our youth hear the echo of gunfire each night and grow up in the shadow of drive-by shootings and gun battles, our leaders in Washington must not shirk their responsibilities to get guns off the streets and out of the wrong hands. That's why we're standing here with Congressmember Becerra to call on the Congress to follow Representative Becerra's lead and pass the National Crime Gun Identification Act without further delay. There's no time for short-term strategies and quick fixes. The time is now to stand up while the gun lobby advocates fewer restrictions on deadly weapons. Now's the time for action to combat the plague of gun violence and to give law enforcement the tools they need to cut down on crime in every way possible. We can't miss this opportunity to improve our public safety. Our children's safety is too important, and the security of our families warrants nothing less.
You've seen enough gun violence. We talk about the deaths of people. You never talk about all the spinal cord injuries and head injuries and all the victims that we don't know their names anymore. We don't even know where they are, how long they live. There are hundreds of thousands of people injured every year seriously in America. So it's about time that the people come together, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and support this type of legislation that will help law enforcement cut down your taxes in regards to anyone firing a weapon, someone seriously injured or killed, so you can basically solve this crime as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
I want to make something really clear. This shell casing, pretty simple. You'll find it on many crime scenes, and I'm sure Chief Bratton, Sheriff Baca would tell you that their officers are constantly picking up these shell casings. Now, right now, these shell casings don't do law enforcement a bit of good unless they happen to find the weapon that was used to fire that shell and commit the crime. More often than not, they don't get to find the weapon. But if they did a simple thing to this shell and etched in a microstamp that could then be used to trace the source of the sale or importation of that weapon, guess what? Just like that, law enforcement has a lead. It can start that trail. That doesn't mean that the person who purchased or secured the weapon was involved in that crime, but at least you can find from where that weapon came and start to begin to trace that weapon that was used in that crime. This is it. This is how simple it is. You won't see the etching because it's microscopic, but it is there.
The bill that Congressman Becerra is offering is simple and it makes sense, and it ultimately allows for the full identification of when a weapon has been fired and a cartridge has been discharged and thus recovered by the police, that we would be able to solve these crimes. In a Coalition to Stop Gun Violence conference in Washington, D.C., 3 examples came to mind as to how valuable this research and this technology could be. On May 7th in 2006, for example, a young man was shot and killed while walking in a restaurant parking lot. Law enforcement found 2 shell casings but didn't have any leads. In July 28, 2005, a 14-year-old boy and his 18-year-old brother were shot and killed in a mini-mart just down the street from their home. Law enforcement found 4 shells casings at the scene and have no leads. In 2000, a man coming home from work was flagged down by a woman in distress at the side of the road. When he went to help her, 2 men tried to rob him. When he ran, they shot and killed him. 3 shell casings were found, no leads. These examples clearly illustrate the need for this technology. I'm very pleased to be here in full support of this. I urge everyone in Congress and the Senate to get behind this very sensible legislation. As Mayor Daley and Mayor Villaraigosa, 2 very strong and courageous mayors who have joined in to say, as a nation, we can do better. And for the sake of those thousands of homicide victims and hundreds of thousands of loved ones that those homicide victims are lost to, and they vice versa lost to them, this is unacceptable. This is not an American standard that we can defend. Thank you.
It's a pleasure standing here with my mayor, Mayor Villaraigosa, the congressman who I applaud in a Congress that's been very reluctant to even talk about this issue, for his courage and once again bringing it to the forefront. Mayor Daley, who I've had the opportunity to spend a great deal of time in his magnificent city, also a leader in this effort to bring sanity to this issue. I find it amazing that the recent beef scare, there was so much in the news, that we put more identification on the package of meat that you buy in a supermarket that allows us to trace it than we do on handguns and these shells that take 16,000 lives a year. Mind-boggling. Sheriff Baca, my close colleague and friend, that we see firsthand with our officers the carnage on our streets, and this year, unfortunately, in the city of Los Angeles, we've seen an increase in that carnage, 93 people killed to date, and of that number, the significant majority killed by guns, the significant majority killed by either semi-automatic handguns or AK-47 type assault weapons, all of which eject numerous shell casings at the scene, which would allow our detectives within a few short hours to begin the critical tracing of where that gun came from, who last had it, and allow us to clear many more of these cases.
You know, we have a murder clearance rate in this city of about 60%. It's a little better here in South Bureau, about 72%. What that means is that every year we have at least 100 murders that go unsolved that are used from gun violence. Wouldn't it be great if the bullets that we find on the ground after a murder caused by a gun were not just figuratively and literally dead ends? That's what they are right now. But if we could take those bullets, if we could see those microstamps, and if we could have the leads that these men who spoke before me talked about. That is why it is important for us not just to have this legislation here in California, but nationally. And I'm proud today that this, which I believe the mayor is about to sign, this resolution which we introduced in City Council to support this legislation, passed unanimously. Republican and Democrat, nonpartisan, a bipartisan way. We see this as sensible, as immediate, and as something that, joining with our friends in other cities, should be a clarion call around this country. When DNA testing was first introduced, people had their doubts. Whenever there's any new technology out there, there is fear. But can you imagine a world today without DNA testing and technology for our police? One day we will look back on this press conference and say, could we even believe that for a moment anybody was against microstamping? But we will have been there to push that issue and to successfully get it, because I know with this incredible team, we will. And just to end with this with a human face, you know, just the past few weeks in my district, we've seen the impact of gun violence. AK-47s pulled on policemen in Glassell Park, a 13-year-old killed while going to pick lemons in front of his home in my neighborhood in Echo Park. As I know Mayor Villaraigosa has too, because he was at the funeral. I've been with that 13-year-old boy's mother. We've seen the human impact. We've seen the tears, the destruction of the family. We've seen the neighborhood ripped apart by a simple act. And while the police are doing an amazing job trying to follow every lead, boy, they sure could use a little more help with that 13-year-old who is today dead. And if we had this sort of legislation, they would know exactly where to begin that trail.